sights from Minnesota Opera's production of Nabucco. Hey, it's our 50th anniversary season. Here we are. So a little applause for that. My name is Dr. Eric McEnaney. I'm in my 4th season as a pianist and vocal coach in the Resident Artist Program. And this afternoon I'm joined by Matthew Opitz, the baritone, who is in his 1st season of the program. One of the other conventions that I'd like to talk to you about, and Matthew's going to join me here, is this idea of something called the double aria form. And maybe some of you have heard of this. And it's a construct that composers used to write opera scenes at the time. And Verdi started to expand on the idea of it a little bit. Now, Rossini had become known for really starting to take this idea of the double aria form, and it sounds like its namesake, 2 arias, but it's so much more than that. And to kind of push it forward, and Verdi took his baton and expanded upon that. So we're going to talk about each section of the double aria form. There are typically 4 to 5. And we're going to use Nabucco's Act 4 aria to demonstrate some of this. So the first section of the double aria form is something called recitativo, and you can probably hear in that word the English word recite. And these are typically non-rhyming lines that are sort of orchestrally accompanied here and there. But the point of the recitativo is, and its function, is to establish the character's situation and the character's mental state at that time. And so this is already Act 4 in the show, and at the end of Act 2, Nabucco had declared himself God in front of the Hebrew god, and was actually struck down by that Hebrew god for making such a claim. And it left him in a mental state that was not so clear. So when we meet Nabucco again in Act 4, he's been imprisoned by his daughter Abigail, and he's having a terrible nightmare. He's asleep. You're going to see in our production he's caged as well. And you can hear in the orchestra, again, this incredible rhythmic vitality characterizing the nightmare. And then all of a sudden, Nabucco tears out of his nightmare, and he says, "Son por queste mia membra?" Are these even my limbs? Is this my body? And then he says, "Oh, no, I'm okay. It was only a dream," right? And so this is just a little bit of the recitativo, the first section of the double aria, and this is Nabucco's Act 4 scene. Again, it's an amazing use of this rhythmic vitality to characterize what's happening in the story. You can really hear the nightmare and hear him tearing out of it, and then realizing that he's all right. Now, the second section of the double aria is called tempo d'attacco, and attaccare in Italian means to attach. And I really love this translation because what this does in this particular section is that it attaches an additional dramatic obstacle for the character to conquer. And so at this point, Nabucco has just said, "Oh, I'm okay," but then he looks around and he realizes that he's a prisoner and totally encased in this cage. But it's not only that, he hears a death march going on below, and it's actually his beloved daughter Filena being led to her execution. So here we have another dramatic obstacle for Nabucco to proceed through, and he doesn't know how he's going to get out of this and save his daughter. And so the text here is "A prigioniero io sono," which means I'm a prisoner. And you'll also hear a slight contrast in our excerpt, and this is where Nabucco actually decides to turn to the Hebrew god that he had blasphemed and ask for help, so that he can kind of meet this dramatic obstacle that's been added and try to conquer through it. So this is a little bit of the tempo d'attacco, or attach, part 2 of the double aria convention.
Io te
thrust in the idea of the orchestra, and then you hear a bit of a contrast. So realize that everything that happens within these sections is a bit of a microcosm for what happens throughout the whole 5 sections. It's that this character has to get from point A, that's usually a state of disarray, into something that's been solved, and so that the character can overcome what's in front of him or her. Let's move on to the third section of the double aria, and this is called the cantabile, which also means singable in Italian. And many of you will recognize this as the first quote-unquote aria of the double aria form, because it's a melody that perhaps you might even be able to whistle when you're walking out. It's something that's incredibly more lyric, and the function of the cantabile is typically for the character to turn inward, to first search inwards to figure out how he or she is going to conquer the obstacle that's been put in front of him or her. And so here Nabucco sings Dio di Giuda, or God of Judah, and he throws a prayer up to this Hebrew God that says, if you help me, if you cleanse my mind, I will build a temple that's even more sacred to you. And so here's just a little bit of the cantabile, or the singable, from the double aria form. And remember, this is where Nabucco is turning introspective to find some help. Scene for you. Isn't he sing that beautifully? Yeah. One thing I want to draw your attention to, notice we've turned introspective here, and what's happened in the orchestra? Not much, right? There's no top to top happening here. And this is sort of a remnant from the idea of the bel canto era, where composers decided to start to turn their attention towards the text and towards the expression of the character at any given moment. And so by simplifying the orchestral texture, the singer is allowed to really put his or her stamp on what's going on with the expression of the text. So that's a big hallmark of the cantabile, often. Now the fourth section of the double aria form is called tempo di mezzo, and mezzo means half in Italian. And this is a very important section in the double aria form because it often offers a complete turn of plot to what's happened before it. And typically it's done by introducing other characters and or the chorus. And in this case it's both. We meet Nabucco's senior officer Abdallo, and also the chorus of men playing the soldiers come into the double aria at this point. And what happens here in the show is Nabucco is trying to actually escape his prison, because by throwing up the prayer to the Hebrew God, his mind has now been cleansed. So he wants to really escape physically. And as soon as he tries to do that, his senior officer Abdallo says, well, no, your mind is not right. Do you really want to go down in front of all of your people and embarrass yourself when you're in such a mental state as this? And Nabucco says, no, my mind is not like that anymore. It's been completely cleansed and I'm ready to go. And he's like, I have my daughter to save, so I've got to get out of here. We're not going to perform anything from this particular section. I sing Abdallo, but I'm not a very good Abdallo. And we don't have a chorus of men for you, but I just want you to know that that's what happens in the fourth section here, the tempo di mezzo, where there's a huge turn of plot. And the final section of the double aria form is called cabaletta, which means couplet in Italian. And it's typically a paired, sort of couple lines of text paired together. It's always faster than the cantabile, and in fact the cabaletta is really the second aria of the double aria form. And its function is to really reflect a sense of resolve. So it's the final point in the character's journey in the scene. We see, again, this state of disarray at the beginning, all the way through to a resolution to move on to the next idea of the story. And at this particular point in the act for aria of Nabucco, Nabucco declares himself king again, and he says, my mind is right, I'm ready to go. And he says, I'm going to go off and save my daughter, and I'm also going to save all of the Hebrews that have been enslaved and condemned to death. And so this is the final part of the double aria. It's called O prodi miei seguitemi, which means brave ones, follow me, as Nabucco sort of brings up the chorus and says, let's go do this, let's go save my daughter Fenena. So you'll notice that the rhythmic vitality is back again in this section. So here's the final section of the double aria. I always say hold on to your hats when the cabaletta comes through. You don't know what you're going to get in terms of energy. So here we see this complete journey of a character from this disarray of mental state all the way through making a decision and moving through to the next scene. Matthew has to get backstage and get into costume, so let's thank him for being here.